All right. So, welcome everybody. Leanne Warren here. See we have someone else joining us. Great. I just find out, Lorelei, can I just ask you a really quick question? Should I be using your work email or the other email that you have with us?
For what purpose? What are you
sending out questions for people to answer as part of the facilitation of the workshop?
Yeah, my work email.
Yeah.
Best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Treasurer, this is Joey from the City Clerk's office. I just want to inform you that we do have quorum and you can call the meeting to order whenever you're ready.
Sorry, I'm not clear. Am I supposed to be doing that? I thought there was
So you can see,
Yeah,
sorry, you can see the agenda up on the screen. Sorry, I should have communicated that with you before the meeting. So we still need to open the meeting and officially close the meeting as well. So we still need a few things of business to happen here. So yeah, so we have the territorial acknowledgement, as well as the agenda needs to be approved, and we can approve the minutes of October 17th as well. And then the workshop kind of hand over, and then you will close the meeting.
Okay. I just need a minute to pull it up on my screen.
No worries.
Sorry. Just pulling it up.
Okay.
Can you make that a bit bigger, please?
Sorry, me?
What was that again?
Whoever's sharing their screen, if they could make the text larger, please.
Oh, it's not me. I'm not sure.
It's me, and I will have to see how I can do that because I'm not sure.
It says it's Leanne on the screen. I'm not sure, Leanne, if you're sharing your screen, but if you could make that just a bit bigger, that would be really helpful.
I'm trying to figure it out. Sorry, that was me that said I was trying to figure it out. It's this one here.
Okay. Maybe the 3 dots on the side there. Oh, there we go.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, it was on the wrong screen. Thank you.
All right. I might as well, while we're figuring that out, call the meeting to order. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Just a reminder for everyone that this meeting is being recorded today. We'll start things with the Indigenous Territorial Acknowledgement. As we gather, let us take time to reflect on our privilege to live and work in Guelph, a city built over rich Indigenous histories. We are guests here, and we should reflect upon the responsibility to care for this land, the people who live here today, and the generations to come. If our actions today can move us toward reconciliation, we should take pause and make those decisions with intention and gratitude. This place we call Guelph has served as traditional lands and a place of refuge for many peoples over time, but more specifically, the Attawandarock and the Haudenosaunee. This land is held as the treaty lands and territory with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Guelph lies directly adjacent to the Halaman Tract and is part of a long-established traditional hunting ground for the Six Nations of the Grand River. Many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who have come from across Turtle Island call Guelph home today. There's a link in our agenda where you can learn more about the Indigenous Territorial Acknowledgement. So,
I don't hear anything. Do other people hear anything?
Oh,
Yes. Yeah.
Yes? Oh, yes. Elizabeth, can you hear us now? I don't know if we have quorum without Elizabeth being able to hear, so should I just pause for now, Leanne?
I believe we do have quorum.
To the chair, we have 10 members right now, so if member Elizabeth is not present, we still have 9 members, so we do have quorum at 9 members of the AAC.
Okay, so I can go ahead and ask about the disclosures of conflict of interest?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Sorry, procedurally, I'm not totally sure. Thank you for your clarification. Conflict of interest. Does anyone want to disclose a conflict of interest for today? I see and hear none. So moving on. Oh gosh. To approval of the agenda. Could I see someone? Okay, we've got Ted approved, and can we have a seconder? Chris Lytle is the seconder. And do we have to vote on that, Leanne?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So if anyone is opposed to the approval of the agenda, if you could raise your hand on camera or using the hand raise function. And I see and hear none, so that passes. Thank you so much. And now we need approval of the minutes as well. Would anyone like to move to approve the minutes? Chris Lytle has a hand raised and Ted to second. Thank you so much. Is anyone opposed to the approval of the minutes? I see and hear no one, so that passes as well. And now we can move into the workshop. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair Root. And hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Nicole Martin. I am from Waterloo Region, and I've been asked to come and to facilitate our workshop today. My background is in social work and organizational development, as well as in the developmental services sector. And as a professional facilitator, I really am passionate about helping groups to have great discussions, collaborate well, and I really do approach all of my work from the belief that we are better together when we bring our many minds together. And so I'm really excited to facilitate our discussion this evening. Thanks for joining me. I'll start by just reiterating the agenda and how we'll be dividing up our time today. So we've done our welcome and opening remarks. I have a few sort of collaborative principles I'd like to suggest that I'm going to share with you. And then we're going to have an opening activity that will help to connect us on our purpose for this meeting and the purpose and importance of the AAC. We're going to have a brief context setting presentation from Jen. And then we're going to move into our discussion about voting methods, voting methods prioritization. And really our main goal and objective for this conversation is to hear all of your different voices and perspectives on this topic. We really want to make sure that we're capturing everybody's thoughts. How does that sound for a plan? All right. These are a few collaborative principles that I love to bring to every session that I facilitate, and I'll just explain them a little bit. So the first one is I'd invite us to hold the belief that everyone has important contributions to make. I certainly believe that of each of you. The next is that nobody knows everything, but together we know a lot. And so our goal here is really to be able to put all of our brains together to have a nice, fulsome discussion. The next one, I'd encourage each of us to be curious and see what we can learn from each other, from perspectives that are similar or different from our own. And then this next one I think is important. You don't have to be articulate all the time. We're here to have a discussion, and if we stumble over our words or need to help each other express an idea, there's space for that. This is really meant to be a discussion, as I said. And then the last one I like to put forward is this concept of move up, move up. And what I mean by that is if you are the type of person who is very comfortable jumping in to share thoughts right away, find some opportunities to move up into a listening role. And if you're someone who tends to hold back and not want to share your ideas, then find opportunities to move up into a speaking role. And so if we are all just creating space for each other, the goal is that we can then make sure we're hearing as equitably as possible from everybody. So those are some of the principles I like to put forward, but I'll invite you to jump in. Is there anything else that you would want to add in order for this to be a productive conversation today? And if you want to use the raise hand function, that's a great way for me to see who's speaking. I'll always give a little bit of time. I like to use silence as a way to make sure people have time to think about what you want to add. So I'll always try to leave a little bit of time for you to see if you have anything else to say. Okay, and if there's nothing else, just a few other comments about how I'll facilitate our time together. I'm going to use my screen share as I am now as sort of a whiteboard or flip chart for our discussion. And so you'll see me, I'll take notes in here real time, but I'll always say what I'm typing out loud as well. So anything that's written on this document will also be spoken by me out loud. I wanted to provide a few different options for the way that you can contribute to this conversation. So we're going to be doing something that's a little different from what you've done before. We'll, at a few key moments during our workshop, Leanne will send you an email that will have a link to a Google form, and there'll be a question that you can respond to in there, so that if you'd like to contribute your thoughts by text and anonymously, then that's a great option for you. If you're not too worried about that, then of course there's also the option to unmute yourself and share your thoughts directly in the meeting here as well. So those are the kind of two ways that you can contribute. You can choose one or you can use both. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up if everyone's following along so far, and if that sounds okay?
Sorry to interrupt. Leanne, you just sent me something, and I don't know whether it was for this workshop, but I'm being told it's being held by so I need you to send it to the other email.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry,
No problem.
is it for today? Do I need to go get it right now? Is it for this?
Yeah, it's for this, yeah.
Okay, I will figure that out. Sorry, everyone. I just got a message that my work is holding it.
Aw.
No problem, Chair Root. And yeah, so now is our first test of this additional way that you can contribute to the conversation. If it's difficult to navigate over to your email to open up that link, then please, no pressure. You don't have to, but you can if you'd like. And so now would be a great time to check your inbox. And there's going to be the question that I have for you for this opening activity. In 1 to 2 sentences, I would invite you to describe an experience with voting that you're aware of. and why accessible voting methods matter to you. So just in a short 1 to 2 sentences. And this could be you sharing from your own experience, or you could be sharing an experience of somebody else that you know. So it's anonymous in that way. We won't assume that what you share is your own experience. It's just an experience with voting that you're aware of. So I'll give us a few moments right now just with silence. You can either go to your email and answer this question in the Google form link that you've been sent, or you can just take some time to think about your response. And in a couple of minutes, I'll invite you to share. Okay, I see a couple of hands up. We'll just wait a few more seconds while people collect their thoughts. Okay, so you'll see that I also, for transparency, have the Google Forms open on my screen share. So in a minute, I'll grab the responses from there and I'll add them to our conversation. But let's start with the hands that we've raised first. Jeanette, in a couple of sentences, could you share, describe an experience?
Yeah, I just wanted to, before we get into this, just mention that I have not received that email with the title opening activity. So I don't know if others are in the same position, but in regards to it's more of a personal opinion rather than something that happened to me, but something that I witnessed is it's become increasingly apparent that we have issues around accessibility when it comes to voting, and it needs to be a priority in how we will remove barriers and fill the gaps so that everybody's voice is heard. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeanette. Appreciate you sharing your comments. And as people share, you'll see that I'll also add note to our document. And so if you ever need me to change something, I'll just do my best to capture in short form what people share. So I've added issues around accessibility. It needs to be a priority. Lorelei.
I'm one of many people in Guelph who can't currently independently vote. There's no accessible voting option for blind, low vision, screen reader users, people who can't hold a pen. We can't independently mark our ballots. So for me, voting is hoping that a stranger marks my ballot the way I've asked them to, with no way to double check it. This is understandably frustrating for me because I've been involved in discussions with the city about accessible voting since 2014, fighting for my right to vote. And every year, I still have had no way to vote. Well, in 2014, they gave us online voting, but they've taken it away again. So it's just really frustrating that a decade later, I'm still having this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that, Lorelei. I've wrote down that there's no option for some people to vote independently, and it's frustrating. Chris.
Hey, thank you. I was thinking it through, and I have no real personal experiences, but having worked in the field for a number of years, I understand that, as Lorelai had said, it's a real degradation of your autonomy when you have to ask someone, whether it be staff member, volunteer, or a stranger who will put your boat down. Nobody else has to encounter that, and aside from people with disabilities. And that is baked into a larger conversation that is more directed along human rights and what those rights are. And so you're looking at services, goods and services and so on, and how we access them. And also, just basic rights in terms of being Ontario citizens, in terms of being Canadian citizens. This trumps all that. So my main concern is that people will keep voting along those lines, and that degrades the autonomy that everybody should have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. And certainly it is a human rights issue. Donna, would you like to share next?
Yeah, I would just like to say that I did not get an email either.
Okay. Thanks for letting us know. Yeah. So I'll just note for Leanne, if there's a way for us to correct that. And if not, we will still have this space for everyone to share vocally. Donna, did you want to share an experience with the group that you're aware of?
The only experience I've had personally is that physically, I have some mobility issues, so it's physically difficult to sometimes I can get there, but it's a long way, for example, from the parking lot into the building or an auditorium or somewhere. And in the past, I've also asked people when they've told me to leave by the back door or whatever, and it ends up being a lot farther away, asking to leave differently, like by the entrance, for example. I don't think it's as if people are not aware of those conditions.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I can see how that would be difficult as well when you're being asked to use a door different from everyone else. It might not feel the same or not be the same experience. I think is it Kathleen in the room? Did you have your hand up? Is it Kathy or Kathleen?
It's either, so Kathy.
Okay, great.
Just going off of what Laura was talking about, I'm in the same position. Not only does it take away or add to personal stress of the experience, it's not efficient to the entire program or the entire methodology of voting. It backs things up for others as well, but then it also becomes a spectacle and it perpetuates stigmas and stereotypes that we're trying to erase. And it's then left with an individual feeling uncomfortable within their own community because it's zip code based. So the individual, like myself in my experience, leaves not only stressed out by the experience, but also insecure about the relationships or spectacle that they have made that others did see, to be able to put those stigmas and stereotypes on that specific individual, and it alienates you from your community.
Thanks for sharing that, Kathy. I think I think I'm hearing that theme from others as well, as around that kind of lack of dignity and the way that we can perpetuate stigma in these situations. I'm going to just pop over to our responses here. I'm going to copy them in and then I'll read them out. I have limited mobility, and last municipal election, I had a hard time walking from the lot in the cold to the gym and to the polling booth. I've had issues with voting being inaccessible because of perfumes worn by participants and facilitators. I have only once or twice been able to vote completely independently, and that was online. Every other method has had issues that have caused me to compromise my independence. Great. Really appreciate you sharing these stories, and I wanted to open this way to just help to ground us in, why this conversation is so important, and why the thoughts, perspectives of the AAC in determining the accessible voting methods, why we're doing this, which I think we're all probably quite aligned on. It sounds like this is something that is really needed. Before we move on, did I miss anyone, or was there anything else you wanted to add here?
So are you going to be moving to the attendees? I see Donna's name and then mine.
Oh yes, sorry. I wondered, I should have clarified. I wondered if the hands were just still up from before. Please do jump in, Jeanette.
I guess my question to you is, the documents that you're generating here from the workshop, are they going to be provided to the city verbatim, or is it going to be part of a report?
I might have to ask one of the staff to respond to that question. And yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I can respond to that. Everything will be provided verbatim from the facilitator, and we'll take that back and bring that for the motion consideration as part of the December 19th meeting. So we're receiving everything as is written today.
Thank you for clarifying that. I just wanted to add one observation. I think in your capture of some of the notes, there is a mention of stripping individuals of their human rights. That hasn't been captured. And I don't see the loss of dignity, which is something that is sort of foremost in any sort of disability accommodations or accessibility. So I just want to make sure that's captured because that was mentioned earlier.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I've added those pieces in. And please, also as we go through the rest of this workshop, if there are other things, we'll make sure we add them in. The meeting's also being recorded, so that recording of the verbatim responses accompanies some of these notes I'm taking. I just really want the notes to help provide a secondary way to consume the information. And so I've added those two pieces in. Thanks. Lorelei.
Yeah, my thought was along those lines, but I wanted to just express, and it's it's not meant to be an insult to you by any means as a facilitator or anything, but just our words and our thoughts and opinions on this matter are so crucial and important that they be directly what we're saying, that I want to make sure that the city is leaning not on these notes, because I don't think that these notes that are being taken, like, these are a facilitator who's coming into the space, who's never met any of us and hasn't been a part of the many, many, many conversations we've had about this, kind of trying to very quickly capture our thoughts. And my thoughts, I don't feel like we're exactly, I would be so much more comfortable with the city leaning on the recording of our verbatim responses as members, rather than point form notes being taken by someone who's never met us and not been involved in this conversation with us yet. And again, it's really no offense to you at all, but when I'm going on about, I've been having this conversation for 10 years and it's about autonomy, but also whether or not I can verify and double check my vote. And then the note that gets taken is some people can't vote independently and that's frustrating. Like, that's not actually exactly what I was saying. And it's not your fault, but I don't think these notes should be the resource for the city. I think our words should be the resource.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Lorelei. I appreciate you sharing that. And I caught a little glimmer in your eye from when I took that note, and I I thought I know I didn't get exactly what you were saying. There's so much experience wrapped up in these brief kind of point form notes that I'm added, and that's not lost on me. Let's try to use these as bullet point to make sure, we've captured some highlights, but I've noted here that we've asked that the staff please lean on the recording and not on these notes for some of the next steps. Yeah, and
Thank you.
Sorry, just to interrupt, I think we need to be explicit here because I think many of us feel the way that Chair Root had just mentioned. I would not put the words lean on, but actually explicitly say, use the recording verbatim to guide. Sorry to be so nitpicky, but it's important.
yeah, no,
And I
appreciate
believe at the end of the meeting, Leanne, correct me if I'm wrong, but will there be time for us, because this is a real AAC meeting, can we make motions? Because I can't put forward a motion, but that would be something that someone could perhaps put forward a motion saying we move that the city not use these notes and rather lean on the recording from this discussion.
So, because of the nature of the workshop, we're not permitted to make a motion at the end of this workshop. However, you'll see, and you did see in the information that was sent out before, a couple of different versions of what could be the motion with blanks to be filled in. And then, so what staff will do is they will generate that draft motion as they always do for the December meeting. And then the AAC will go ahead and have a discussion in December and, make the motion that the AAC wants to make at that point.
Okay, so no motions today, motions in December.
Right.
Gotcha. Thank you.
That's a really great segue then for me to pass things over to Jennifer for a moment, just to share a bit of a context setting presentation, kind of recap where you've come in the last year as a committee and where we're going with this work here today. And after she's presented, we'll take some time to discuss, what you heard and how you feel about it, and any questions that have surfaced.
All right, thank you, Sarah Nicole. I heard I was getting some feedback with my audio. Can you hear me okay, or I can change my headset? Okay. If there's any weird feedback, just let me know and I'm happy to change that.
Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of it here. My apologies. I can hear a little bit of it.
The room mics will pick you up. Yeah.
Okay, is that better?
No, that's worse.
1 second, just please. Yeah, you're good. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
My apologies. I'll pop up the presentation now.
You'll have to speak up a little bit louder. Okay. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us today. As Sarah Nicole mentioned earlier, today is really about listening, learning, and hearing from all of you. So I don't want to take up too much time. We just wanted to take a moment to provide a little bit of context as to where we are at in the engagement process and next steps, just to guide and give you a sense of where we're going after today. So after going through the 2022 election process, we learned a few things, and we certainly learned a lot about how we can work with this committee to better engage and have a bit of a different process. Certainly one of the first things we learned is that we need more time for engagement, and we need more time to consider options before going to council. And that's really the nature of why we're meeting so early in this process in 2023 before 2026. We also learned that members of the AAC don't always feel heard. We want to make sure that there's a good opportunity to build trust and ensure that every voice is heard and that we're including all of that transparently as part of the council decision-making process. And we also heard concerns about, from members and from our community that not all individuals feel like they have the ability to vote independently. And that's certainly something we take very seriously, and we appreciate all the feedback we're receiving as part of this process throughout this year. That's one of the reasons that we have this full year engagement process, and you'll see in a moment, from April right until the end of this year, we'll be meeting with you and discussing this project with you. And that was brought forward in February of 2022, if that's a helpful reference. So where have we been in 2023? This is a pretty full year engagement plan that we've been working on. So during April, we met with you and we talked about voting method options, accessible voting service enhancement options that we've identified. And we conducted a survey with you after that session to identify if there was anything additional we should include as part of our research to bring back to you. We didn't receive any additional options at that point, so we went forward ahead of the August engagement with you and we conducted research, some comparator benchmarking, engaged with community stakeholders. And in August, we brought all of that back to you for information. In August, we also brought decision-making criteria that we will consider leading into the 2026 decision. And we received feedback from you in the August meeting for that as well. And all of that, all of the information findings, all the feedback we've received so far was part of the information package for today's meeting. And then today, we're here for the workshop, and we're really here to engage and receive feedback as we consider options and we note priorities ahead of the December meeting coming forward later this year. So where are we now? Hopefully we'll be able to, everyone had the opportunity to read through the package. I appreciate there was a lot of information in there prior to the meeting today, but it is a great reference if you're looking at those materials as we discuss things. With Sarah Nicole's help, we're going to be considering, lived experiences, a variety of criteria, and our goal really for today is to consider each alternative voting method and create a list of forces that attract and of forces that repel, and to get that sense of prioritization or, the range of options really that the committee is looking forward to for 2026. These are the methods that we're here to evaluate, and I'll acknowledge that most of our engagement so far has been on two things, and this is where we will be bringing back to council on two things. There's the alternative voting methods, which are listed here on the slide, and there's also the voting enhancements, which typically are more of an in-person experience. So today we're really going to be deep diving and focusing our conversation on the alternative voting methods. We appreciate, in the interest of time, we want to give a lot of fulsome conversation to that, as that's the item that council is required to make a decision on within a certain time frame. So we'll focus our conversation there today, but I will make a note at the end of the presentation. There is still lots of opportunities and options for the committee to provide feedback on the voting enhancements. And so I'll note that at the end today as well.
Can you just read out those alternative methods, please?
Sure.
Methods.
Absolutely. So the voting methods that we're going to be looking at today is the vote from home voting method, internet voting, vote by mail, vote by phone, and remote accessible vote by mail. So next steps, really today we're here to identify priorities that can inform a draft motion for the December 19th. So I'll be careful with that wording there because I appreciate the conversation we've noted earlier about we're not making a motion or anything today. This is just to help staff collect information and help start that draft motion for the next meeting. In December, we'll seek the committee's motion following that workshop. So that's the next step opportunity for us to really hear a formalized motion from the committee. And that motion will be transparently shared and included as with all of the feedback we have from the committee as part of the Q2 2024 report to council. That's the deadline they've given us to report back. So all of that will be transparently included and shared as part of that report. I just want to acknowledge for a moment, as it stands, we don't know what the staff recommendation is going to be. That's not something we discussed or decided. We wanted to take a moment to do all of our research, hear all of the feedback before considering options. And in saying that, our intention really is to paint a picture for council in our report next year. We're going to lay out all of the options, all of the opportunities, all of the risk and potential considerations, all of the staffing, all of the financial requirements, so that they really have a menu, so to speak, of all of the options that they can choose from when we present that. Our intention is to provide, materials similar to what you have in your information package today. We'll be providing the same context and the same considerations to council, and we want to be consistent in that. In saying that we don't have our staff recommendation ready yet, or we haven't considered what our recommendation will be, I'll also just note that we don't know yet if, our intention really is to align with what the committee recommends and what their motion provides. But if our information or if our final recommendation should be any different, our intention again is to provide everything transparently to council. We'll be considering, as you've seen, decision-making criteria around accessibility, around providing the most independent voting experience as part of our decision-making criteria, but we just want to acknowledge that the intention is to fully transparently provide all information regardless of what final recommendations are made.
Before you move on, can I ask a question? When you're looking at the various criteria and the factors that's going to inform the outcome, where does cost weigh into it? Are we going to be using cost for different options as a as a factor, or are we going to be accessible whatever the cost?
So I think it's important to reflect on the fact that that's not a decision of staff. Our role is to present all options with all costs and consider how that could impact our current budget, because we only have the dollars that council has already approved. So our intention is to map out the cost and consideration of all of the options available, and then have council decide should they choose additional options beyond our current funding scope. They can allocate additional dollars, staffing, etc. to that. We want to make sure that our intention is to provide every option that we can, but it's not a decision of staff to increase budget dollars or financial resources in order to provide additional things. So really, I think the intention is to be as transparent and open as possible, and that's ultimately part of council's decision on what methods they approve.
Right, thank you. And so the staff report where the recommendation will be provided with the various options, that'll be made and forwarded to AFC before council, or how will that be in that way that you're saying transparent to us?
Absolutely. So we can't provide the council report prior to it going to council or the members of the public, in the sense that, we don't do that for any of the committees, and it would provide a very confusing environment if members of council or the mayor asked questions for a report they didn't actually even have yet. Our process, as we've had with other reports, would be to, through the liaison for this committee or at an upcoming meeting, if we were attending, would be to, notify well in advance what agenda it's going to be on, notify committee members when, as part of the report cycle and the agenda cycle, that information would become public, and then, everyone receives information at the exact same time.
Thanks for the clarification.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the questions. And I'll just kind of wrap up by saying, when this does go to council, we're very flexible on how we present this, and something that we'll have an ongoing dialogue and conversation with. It doesn't just have to be city clerk's office staff presenting on this item. We can work with, Leanne and Sarah as part of accessibility services. We can also work with Chair Root as part of the process to develop a bit of a joint presentation, such that, everyone is at the table and council is hearing from all of the voices as part of that presentation. So I'll put that out there, and that's something certainly we can discuss further as we plan for next year. So I'll wrap up. I'll say thank you for your time. Really, this is kind of the caveat I'll note here. If we don't get to accessible voting enhancements today. We're certainly, open. Our intention really is to provide every accessible voting enhancement that we can. And we'll frame information on that in the report to council. But because the accessible voting enhancements aren't approved by council, they're a staff decision. We're happy to receive any feedback or impact you have on that. You can certainly include recommendations around that in your motion if you choose to on December 19th. But you're also welcome to share any information or feedback you have with Carrie, myself, Leanne. Feel free to email, call us. We're happy to set up a meeting or a time to discuss that with you if you feel like a specific enhancement would be something that would greatly benefit members of the community. But beyond that, our intention really is to provide every option we can if we don't get to speak to that today. And I'll say thank you with that. I will stop sharing my screen and I'll turn it back over to Sarah Nicole.
Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer. I think that's a helpful journey to be reminded of where we've come from, where we are now, where we're going. And I wanted to give a moment for each of you to just take a second to process what you've heard with 3 questions that I'll pose to you. And you can, again, use the link that Leanne will email out, or you can share your thoughts out loud, or both. And I'm interested to hear, what did you hear as a way to kind of clarify and reiterate, understand what you heard Jen say? How do you feel about what you heard? And what questions are still lingering for you? We won't answer those questions today, but we'll collect those questions so that they can be answered at your next meeting. This is just to give us sort of a brief moment to pause and check understanding with one another. So I'll give a few minutes of quiet so that you can either navigate to the link to add your responses or think about what you might want to say. Okay, let's start with Lorelei.
Thank you. Yeah, what I heard was staff talking about the staff experience so far of the conversations we had after the last prior to the last election. I heard about the staff timelines. I think the main thing I want to hit on is how I feel about what I heard. I do feel a little invalidated that we are hearing a very staff-driven, one-sided, because there's a lot that happened over the last year of trying to figure out election results and things like that, that I'm hoping will also be part of the consideration. It just seems so far to be a very City of Guelph centered conversation and a city staff centered conversation. And I'm having some hopeful, like some gentle hopefulness that we will turn the conversation to be centered around the voices of the people here who are disabled and need access to voting. Also, the people here who have been on this journey for a number of years with the city and have been involved in the process and who felt very betrayed by the process last year. Comments like we didn't have sufficient time that were made in the presentation, that's not how it felt. Last year, it felt like there was a lot of time and staff reported that they had enough time. And then when council said, okay, we might go ahead with this option, staff said, actually, we've changed our mind. We don't have enough time. So I just want to make sure that the whole conversation isn't driven by staff, and that I want to make sure the other members here, and I'll mention it at the AAC meeting that we have later as well, remember that staff drafting a motion for us doesn't mean that has to be the motion that we put forward, and that we get to write our own motions. They don't even have to be a little bit like the staff motions. I just want to make sure that our voices are centered in this conversation. I don't really have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorelei. This is exactly the space wanting to hear your thoughts on this and why we've asked this question. I've tried to note, but again, the verbatim recording will be taken into consideration. But if you do notice anything I've written that you don't like, please let me know and I can change it. Chris.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to note that, you know, looking at this from a standpoint of barriers, there's still barriers inherent within that system of trying to get open spaces for people to vote. And what that represents to me is sort of a liability around the potential for liability. You know, the Ontario government had said about 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, that things will be accessible by 2025 and so on. And we're still working around these conversations. And so I really want to hit it home that this isn't only a nice to do. It is absolutely a human rights requirement of a municipality, of a provincial government, of a federal government to allow for its citizens to be able to vote. And if they can't, to provide accommodations along those lines to make things as accessible as possible. So I heard words about enhancements. Enhancements is a good term, but it doesn't matter back to any piece of legislation that's human rights based. So we're talking about accommodations and accessibility, which are rooted in conversations that cover human rights. We're talking about a barrier that exists that we've been able to articulate over the last little while. And that gravity of that situation still doesn't seem to be taking hold. So I just want to be clear that this is actually a human rights consideration. If someone is prevented from voting by a barrier that could have been easily removed, then that unto itself represents a liability to the city, both financially and reputationally.
Thanks, Chris. I've tried to capture in brief what you've shared about, you know, this isn't only a nice to do, it's a human rights requirement that governments allow for citizens to vote, and that enhancements is good, but it doesn't really go far enough. It doesn't really capture the gravity of the situation, and liability should be a motivating force as well. Does that?
I'm not saying that liability should be a motivating force. It should be a factor in the decisions that are made that affect us. I think that that's something that's sort of skirted the conversation for a while. But I mean, with the other points of view that have been raised, this has been articulated before. The need to want to vote and the right of us to be able to fulfill that responsibility. So I think that liability is part of the equation in terms of looking at this as a value.
Thanks, Chris. We'll go to Jeanette, just since we haven't heard from her yet, and then back to Lorelei.
Yeah, I want to, I suppose, just say I feel what Chair Root had said. I wasn't aware of the historical missteps. Let's just put it that way. Kind of horrified that we're here 10 years later You don't need to write that. I think what I'd like to say is that the solution can't be staff driven. The staff will facilitate us and others in a disability working group that is recognized by the city. It must be informed by this group. It can't be adapted or enhanced. It should entirely be driven by those people in this city who make their voices heard. And then staff should propose the recommendation that is the best fit and has been recommended by this group and others like this group. Period.
Thanks,
Thank
Jeanette.
you.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is that the solution must absolutely not be driven by staff. It must be driven by this group and by others who are expressing voices in the community who have experiences to share. Yeah, bottom line being that staff are here to facilitate.
And yeah, move the process forward to where it needs to go for decision makers to make an informed decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeanette. Lorelei, and then I'm going to check on the text comments that people would have added.
And Ted has has his hand up as well, so just wanted to know that. Like physically,
Ted.
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, who was that?
Ted had his hand up physically.
Okay, Lorelei and then Ted.
I just wanted to kind of bounce off of what Chris said earlier and maybe highlight that I know that during these conversations last year, there were a group of people, and I was one of these people. I'm not going to say who the other people were, but who actually did meet with the Ontario Human Rights Commission about the fact that we cannot independently vote. And we were told that we do have a case to be made for the fact that the city is failing their duty to accommodate, because they've been made aware for so many years that there are people who cannot independently vote, and they've been offered multiple options to allow us to vote, and none of those options have been used. But precedent has been set by that the city of Guelph did use those types of options in 2014. So this is a very real situation that Chris is talking about, that that group of people, myself included, decided last year in good faith to try to work with the city instead, because we felt like we were making some progress. It's going to have been more than 10 years since this conversation started with me involved in it by the time the next election happens. So I don't see that good faith type of discussion being able to continue repeatedly forever, you know.
Lorelei, Ted.
Can you speak up, Sarah Nicole, please? We didn't hear you, Sarah Nicole.
Oh, I just invited Ted to share his thoughts. You are on mute.
Ted, you're on mute. We can't hear you. The microphone at the top, if you can click on it, that will make your microphone live again. The microphone, it almost looks like a speaker. We can't unmute it for you, unfortunately. I wish we could, but we can't. It looks like a speaker. I'm gonna just share my screen.
Ted, if you have a keyboard in front of you, there's a button on the bottom left that says CTRL. If you hold that button down and also hold down the space bar at the same time, hold them down the whole time you're talking, that should work. And then let go. So a button that says CTRL on your keyboard in the bottom left-hand corner, and the long button that's the space bar. If you hold those down both at the same time while talking. Yes, we hear you. Perfect. Go ahead. Oh, you have to keep holding them down while you talk though, Ted. So press those two buttons again and then just keep holding them down the whole time you're talking and let go when you're done talking.
So are you talking to me?
Yes.
Yes, that's working now. We can hear you now.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I guess I wasn't really hearing if I was being on here. But anyway, I was just thinking that it's council that has to really understand what's happening. And I'm not sure if they do know what's happening when it comes to voting procedures. I think the staff, maybe it's a bit of a problem, but I think more than that, it's the council that's a problem. They just don't know. Anyway, that's all I really had to say.
Thanks, Ted. What I'm hearing you say is that council has to understand what's happening. You're not sure that they do understand. Staff may be part of that problem in translating that message, but council might also be part of that problem just in not understanding the complexities or not understanding the real issues.
That's correct. Did you hear that?
We did. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, thank you.
I
Thanks
think
for
I found my microphone.
Yay.
and thanks for the tips there, Lorelei, too. I don't know some of those shortcuts. That's handy to know.
Thank you, Lorelei.
Okay. I'm going to just check on to see if anybody submitted responses via the survey. It looks like we have one. So let me just pull those comments over. In response to what did you hear, providing context to why we are discussing this. How do you feel about what you heard? Not sure yet that our voices will produce any significant changes. I'm just going to give me a second to just bring this over here for that transparency piece. So not sure yet that our voices will produce any significant changes. I feel that that's a theme that I'm hearing in some of the other comments that folks have shared as well. Is that fair to say? Yeah, seeing some head nods. And I'll just pull over this other comment as well. Okay. Okay, so I do think that, it's important for us to start out with some of this context, these thoughts and feelings. I know there's a lot of history here that's important for us to be able to put out into this space before we move into talking about the specific voting methods. Is there anything else folks would like to add here before we move into talking about the specific voting methods? Okay. All right, well, let's get into it then, because I do want us to have time to hear all of your thoughts on each of these methods, and we're going to move through them one by one. Before we dive in, I wanted to just share a little bit of context around how I've organized this activity. Did any of you do weird things when you were a kid? It's kind of a broad general question, but one of the weird little things I used to do all the time when I was a kid, I love to take 2 magnets off the fridge and then try to force them together. You know that feeling when they just won't connect because you don't have the right forces attracting each other. That's kind of the analogy that I want to use for part of this discussion today. We'll call this sort of a force field analysis, and we'll take a look at each voting method and try to jot down from your perspective, what are the forces that attract us to this voting method, and what are the forces that repel us from this voting method. And there may very well be both for some of these, or there may be only one for some of these. But we really do want to, I do want to capture all of your thoughts. At the end of this discussion, we'll do kind of like a scoring that helps us to look at how strong each of the forces are, but I'm going to explain that when we get to that point. For now, all you need to know is that we want to try to capture your thoughts on, you know, what are the forces that attract us to this method and what are the forces that repel us from that. We're going to just have this be discussion in the room, so there won't be a link sent for this one. And I'm just going to do my best to really note as accurately as possible your thoughts and check in with you to make sure that I'm understanding you along the way. Lorelai, did you have a question before we get into this?
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand the kind of assignment, but it sounds like you're saying you want us to list things we like about accessible voting options and things that are negatives about accessible voting options or reasons that it might not work. And I don't know how appropriate it is to ask a bunch of equity-seeking individuals who are here to request that our needs be met to argue against our own needs. So I'm not sure if that's what you're saying when you say forces that repel. It sounds like you're asking us to kind of brainstorm and think up reasons why these voting options might not be a good idea. And I just don't feel like that's super ethical from a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens.
Yeah, thanks, Lorelai. And I think I just really want to explore anything that's on your mind, not force you to bring anything to the surface that's not on your mind. And so you may very well say that, you know, there are no forces on the repelling side of things. And that's the completely acceptable response. But I just want to create space for any and all thoughts that people have. There are no, I'm not sitting here saying there's a right or wrong answer. I just want to hear what your thoughts are.
So you are asking us to come up with reasons that accessible voting options might be bad.
I guess if we're looking at prioritizing what you want the city to do, like your direction, then, you know, we would need to, I think, let work through this with me, okay? I'm willing to be wrong on this. I am so willing to be wrong. But I think that part of this exercise is moving to prioritize what your recommendation is to council. And so I want an exercise that can help us to think through all of the aspects of each of these voting methods. Do others want to weigh in on this as well? Like, let's just chat it through. And if we need to adapt this, we can. Like, I'm willing to be wrong on this.
Jeanette is.
I just would hate for this to. Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, I'd hate for this to go to council and say, we don't want the AAC had a bunch of reasons that this didn't, you know.
I guess, so my comment is an observation. If I am looking at our goal is to provide accessible voting for all in Guelph. When I look at different options, I look at whether or not this meets the goal or it does not meet the goal. And then another column could be, why does it not meet the goal? I think that would be a more focused, strategic way of getting answers from this group. Go back to your goal. Thank
Right.
you.
So one suggestion is let's scrap the analogy on the force field analysis and just discuss on one hand, you know, how
I don't
this
know why I sometimes hear Sarah and then I don't hear Sarah, but yeah, I just wanted to add, if you don't mind, to what was just said about, and we do this kind of exercise at the university too. For instance, we're trying to make sure that our admissions practices are accessible to everyone, and every option has its down points, right? So what we do is we look at, you know, what's the plus side of using this method? What's a potential thing that would be make it inaccessible for someone, and how can we work on that? Like, how can that be fixed, right? So I think instead of seeing it as a, you know, deal breaker, more of an opportunity to say, okay, this might come up, so what can we do to make sure that it's not going to have a negative impact?
So would it be fair to say, looking at kind of what some of the challenges might be with some of the methods? Is that what I'm hearing you say, Elizabeth?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay.
I mean, it's good for us. Like, nothing's going to be perfect, right? But we can decide together what we feel would be the most accessible for the most number of people, or maybe like more than one strategy for different populations.
But we don't have to choose just one. We can say that we recommend all of the voting enhancements. So I don't understand why the city would come here and fish for us to give them reasons when every year they come to us with a ton of reasons that it won't work, it won't work, it won't work. Our job is to come with our actual experiences and our needs. We're an equity seeking group. So I don't think it's our job to come up with the reasons it might not work.
Okay, yeah. So I really just want to provide a structure for you to have this conversation, to explore and express everything you want to within each of these methods. And so I'm wondering if maybe we scrap the framework altogether and we just hear people's thoughts around each one. We'll move through kind of one by one and just create space for anyone to say whatever they'd like to say about that method.
So I've got some points here if I can.
Please.
So starting with the internet, we're trying to meet the goal with that, but the barrier is that some people with disabilities might not have access to the internet, or might be using a secondary internet for purposes of communicating. So the pro is that it possibly could reach a wide population. The negative is that it doesn't capture everybody because of whatever financial resources people might have. From home, I know that that's another option that could be added to the echelon of potential accommodations for this, but I think it is, you know, it seems to me to be an important factor to realize that some of these mailboxes are centralized. People don't have access to them from their homes. That might in itself become an unforeseen barrier. So just to highlight that factor. And mail, you know, I'm not a pro on snail mail, so I'll leave that open to other people, but I think those first two are a good start.
Chris, did I capture your thought in saying that internet voting is appealing because it reaches a wide group, but recognizing that a challenge could be not everyone has the resources to access. It won't be a one size fits all.
Yeah, not everyone has the resources to have their own internet connection. And, you know, I'd like to be corrected if I'm wrong on this by other members of the committee, because it is very important. If there's somebody who can chime in on the access of people with disabilities to the internet and just correct that if it is wrong, then I'd appreciate that greatly.
Okay, thanks. Lorelei and then Cameron.
Yeah, so for internet voting, Forces that attract, there are quite a few. There's the most, it's had the most positive response from voters in the past when asked by the city their preferred method of voting. It is the most widely accessible to the most people. Nothing is going to be accessible to every group, which is why I believe we should be recommending a number of these options. No one of them is going to work for everyone. So Chris's point is a very good one, that not everyone has access to internet. Not everyone has the ability to use the internet. Some folks find it confusing. But I don't want to list all the reasons things won't work. I would rather focus myself on the reasons that they will, because we kind of need to provide people with a plethora of options so that they can say, like, oh, I'm someone who uses a screen reader and can't go to in-person voting locations, so I can choose to use internet voting or remote accessible vote by mail. And I'm someone who can't use a computer or doesn't have access to the internet. I can vote by mail, though, or I can go to a polling station. So I think all of them are going to have the same challenge, which is that no one option is going to work for everyone, because that's not how accessibility works. But for internet voting, yes, it's the most widely accessible. It is the only option. That internet and remote accessible vote by mail are the only options that work for people like me. Vote from home is a good option for people who have environmental sensitivities, mental health concerns, but it can also cause barriers of mental health for people with mental illness. So people with agoraphobia, for example, may not want people coming to their home for them to vote. For vote by mail, it is difficult to get to a mailbox. For some people, the turnaround time isn't great. They often will lose your ballots in the mail and you never get your ballot. That's what's happened to me in the past. Remote accessible vote by mail is a great option for all of the reasons that I think internet voting is a great option. Remote accessible vote by mail being a system where you access your ballot online on a computer. You can use a screen reader or any other assistive technology to mark your ballot. Then you print your ballot off and sign it and mail it in. So it's a real paper ballot that can be recounted, which helps with staff's concerns about computer election fraud, but not everyone has access to a printer. You can use the library, but there are reasons that would be difficult for people. And vote by phone isn't accessible for everyone either. It can be confusing, but it is more accessible than a lot of things. So I would say that none of these options on their own are going to be enough. I think we're probably going to need at least 3 of these in order to accommodate the most people's needs and not leave anyone out. I can't see a situation where I can vote in this next election without either internet voting or remote accessible vote by mail. And I know there are other people like me who won't be able to vote without those options, but I'm sure there are also people who won't be able to vote without a vote from home option or a vote by phone or vote by mail. So. Sorry, I went through the whole list, but I've just been involved in this conversation so long, I have a lot of thoughts.
No, that's okay. That's great. And we can move around and come back and continue to add more. I've made note on top here of the chart of some of the items that kind of apply to the whole picture. And I wanted to make sure you know that I've captured this thought. No one option will work for everyone. We will need multiple options. You shared that you don't like the idea of naming reasons people wouldn't want this option. I think it's important to note that that's an expressed concern. And none of these will be enough on their own. And then I've also noted that you said internet voting and vote accessible by mail, those would be required by you or folks like you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to vote again in this election.
Not independently anyway. I don't know.
Kathy in the room also has her hand up.
Okay, we'll go to Cameron, and then we'll go to Kathy in the room, and then Elizabeth. And feel free to, if you want to just start on one, you can, and we can make our way down the list and come back to everyone. Or if you just want to get all your thoughts out at once, that's okay too.
Yeah, so hi. Sorry about the bird. Internet the internet voting is very accessible for a lot of people. It allows people to use many of the tools or hardware that they're already using in day-to-day life to be able to access it. One of the points often brought up against it is the concern that computers can be hacked, and Guelph isn't a big city. We wouldn't be a target for hackers. And if someone's going to go to the trouble to hack computers to commit election fraud, whether it's being done online or not isn't going to be a barrier to them if they are that determined. So we shouldn't let fear of an imaginary hacker prevent so many people from being able to access it. There's also the time investment. It is very quick and easy to vote online. Yeah, I know that this could also make it a lot easier for a lot of able-bodied people as well.
Thank you. So I've noted here that this internet voting would allow tools and hardware people are already using, which is a major benefit. It's quick and easy, which will make things better for everybody, not just folks with an accessibility need. And I've noted over here, but maybe I'll move this because I don't think you're saying that it's a challenge. You're saying we should stop thinking of it as a challenge. The idea that computers can be hacked, it's often brought up, but we shouldn't let the fear of that prevent us, because if someone wants to hack an election, they're going to find a way to do it, no matter what methods we're using. Have I captured you correctly?
Yeah, that.
Thank you. Okay, Kathy in the room.
I think this is a really great example of how language itself and the comprehension of what accessibility is in fact a barrier on its own when we're trying to translate what these real life perspective issues is into how society is built and constructed, and being a physical and on paper issue. When I look at something like this, I'm unable to see this. So I'm sort of going off memory of what we kind of discussed. And I look at it as in terms of universal design. I would encourage all pieces of any type of accessible format to be used, because it will in fact support somebody's needs, opposed to they and them of voters able-bodied and voters disabled. It should be accessible to everyone because it's going to meet more needs than we recognize and acknowledge. But I think each and every specific topic or format for having accessibility voting comes with its own set of barriers. And my concern is that council will look at a specific barrier and decide it works for what they comprehend as what accessibility is. And just even the built environment can be adjusted to be an accessible place. Like that's not even on this list for accessibility. Whereas I personally would have, I would do it as I would go online, I would write it, I would fill it out online. I wouldn't be able to, without support, still sign in the specific area because it's not, there's no indication bumps to do so. I would feel comfortable taking it into like a quick drop zone for accessibility, almost like in an airport when there's like an accessibility line, manned by individuals and supported by individuals to address people to accessibility places when asked. So it's really a mix and match of what's going to work for individuals and the access to and the knowledge as well and comprehension of what is set up and what the system actually looks like to be able to put in their vote. People's needs are not set in one road or one avenue. You're going to have to mix and match to be able to meet this need efficiently, and that's what my main goal would be. And voting itself is really sort of displayed as this large community piece. So suggesting that accessibility is all very isolated when the advertisement of voting is very community based. We want to make sure that this is like accessibility is for the entire community and is for built environment as well as online or virtual environment, even on the phone. But I really want to get the council, when getting these recommendations, aren't sitting and saying, okay, that doesn't work or that costs too much money like that. Like take it so literally. It's going to have to be taken literally, but also adjustments in that moment and recommendations in that moment of how to find those solutions. So I'm assuming that council doesn't have a vast background in accessibility barriers and solutions. So this is where I think the extra communication of when council hears information like this, what are their initial barriers to that? And what solutions between our council, our supporting staff, City of Guelph, and the council, the decision makers in the end, how are these solutions and recommendations made? Because it's certainly not as simple as the internet works or it doesn't work. Take it on or off the list. Well, we gave you the list. You used the internet. It didn't work for you. We did our part. And I think that's where a lot of insecurities come from our community. So I think it's a couple of extra steps, and we need to do a couple of some more listening on both sides and in between to really push that type of language to understand what accessibility solutions are and where exactly are the barriers, because one group might feel like a barrier was lifted, but the other group is really pushing to say that barriers don't go away ever, but we're going to continue to evolve and find solutions as these issues are evolving.
Mhm. Thanks, Kathy. You've shared a lot of like really insightful and in-depth comments. And one of the things standing out to me, if I can try to summarize, and you can let me know if I'm missing the mark, but is that we really need to be able to well, there's a concern that there's a limitation in council's ability to understand based on their perspectives and experiences. And so what are their barriers to understanding what they need to understand? Because just there's a risk in just taking things literally as like checkbox, this works, this doesn't work. It misses the nuances and am I capturing you correctly, or have I missed something major?
I think so. I think that again, it's just something that we can record to see how that, even what I said, is articulated or translated onto paper as a quote unquote recommendation. So I think time will tell in this space, but it's important that it's recognized. I think that this is an us and them conversation, and to make it a together conversation needs a couple extra steps of active articulation and listening by both parties.
More listening on all sides. Thanks. Let's go to Elizabeth.
Thanks. I was just going to ask, I know the second part is vote from home, but I'm not clear on what that means, because as far as I'm concerned, voting by internet could also be vote by home, and vote by mail would also kind of be vote by home because you're at home when you're potentially doing it. So I'm not quite sure what that category actually means, but I just wanted to say something about the internet. Like, I think, you know, where we are now with our ability in technology, it's going to make, or it could potentially make things so much more accessible for people, even let's say at a senior's home, and I think this was brought up in another meeting a while ago about having like a mobile kiosk, like a, like a, a money transaction where you have the internet set up in a kiosk with the voting, and people just come and press what buttons they need to validate their identity and to vote. So it's potentially like we could put up voting machines all over to make it much more accessible to people rather than going to an actual voting station. And they could do it online in their home or at work or whatever, wherever. So it's potentially even more accessible if the hardware is there to support it.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Appreciate your comments. I've wrote down your thought around a mobile kiosk and making voting accessible in multiple areas. There was some documents that went out prior to this meeting that defined each of the pieces. I won't go into those right now, but if anyone else does feel the need to or want to expand, please do feel free to do that. Lorelei.
Yeah, just very quickly, vote from home was the option where someone would show up at your door with a ballot and you would mark your ballot with their assistance, and then they would collect your ballot and leave. That's what the vote from home meant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And I think
No
as
worries.
someone on the spectrum, that's not something that I would want to.
Same, also autistic and also would hate that. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, I think I've put my finger on what is bothering me about this exercise, listening to others talk. And what's bothering me about this is it feels like we're being asked to maybe pick a few of these that are the best, or which one of these is the best, and like kind of compare and contrast all these different voting enhancements to help city staff decide which ones. And to me, that's frustrating because no two disabled people have the same needs. So we are all going to have different answers for which one is the most important for us and which one is absolutely necessary for us and which one would be an absolute impossible deal breaker for us. Like Elizabeth and I just showed, a lot of people would love vote from home. I personally would never want someone, I have PTSD too. I don't want someone showing up at my house. So I think my frustration is, why do we have to pick and choose? Why can we not live in a city where someone like myself comes forward and says, hi, I can't vote. And the city says, cool, what are the barriers? Let's remove them. Let's not swap it out for another thing that's already helping other people. Like, let's not take away vote by mail to put internet voting in here because internet voting works better for Lorelei. Let's add internet voting to the already running list of options we have. So and this has been a frustration I've had with the city, where it seems like we're having to prove like which option is the best one, and we can only pick one or two, we can only pick 2 or 3. And I understand that budget restraints are a thing, and that, constraints, whatever, are a thing, and that there are a whole bunch of concerns that the city has about a bunch of the different methods. But asking us to help with this like accessibility Hunger Games of like which disabled people are going to come out on top and get the chance to vote in the next election, and like some years some of us can vote and then the next year that option that we used is taken away from us and now we can't vote anymore because a committee of people said they didn't need it. That to me is really frustrating. I don't want to live in a city where in the future, that when I'm no longer on the AAC, they decide that the only voting method that worked for me is no longer important, so it just gets taken off the list. So I would urge the city not to have us help you decide which ones are the most important, because I think they are all going to be important, because everyone deserves the right to vote. Currently in our city, there are people who don't have an option, and I think we need to tend to those people's needs and make sure they have an option without taking any options away from people. And that's what my frustration is with this, like scoring the importance and forces that repel and attract. I don't want to be involved in this Hunger Games of like battle royale of which disability wins. I would much rather we just, why not offer all of the voting enhancements? I understand that the city is going to say we can't, we don't have the budget, but that's not actually the AAC's concern. That's a very harsh thing to say, but the AAC is here to advise on what is accessible. We're not here to consider the city's budget. We're here to say this is what the disabled community wants. This is what the disabled community needs. Because I don't want a report going back to council that says that the AAC said certain things weren't as important, when realistically, I don't think any of us probably feel that way. I think we all feel that anything accessible would be great, and any more accessibility we can get would always be great. So I just want to remind everyone that we don't have to care about the city's budget. That's council's job. That's why we that's why we voted them in, right? Those of us who could vote, which I couldn't. But like that's council's and staff's job to figure out. We don't have to concern ourselves with budget, with could it get hacked, with anything. All we have to concern ourselves with is, does it help remove barriers for disabled people? And I don't love the structure of this conversation being focused on the city's needs and narrowing it down.
Ted has had his hand up. I just want to mention that.
Okay, Ted, we'll come to you in a second. What I'm hearing you say, Lorelei, is that we need all of these options and more. We shouldn't be picking and choosing which options, which disabilities we're removing barriers for, and which disabilities we're not removing barriers for. We just, plain and simple, we need to do everything possible that we can do. Am I hearing you correctly? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Ted and then Chris.
If I'm up, I think the only thing that we're looking for is for computer access to be included. Everything else that Laura has said is absolutely perfect. And everything that is on that list is great. All we want is internet access, because that would make it totally perfect. If totally perfect is something anyone can really say. Okay? Period.
Thanks, Ted. Sorry, and I lost track. Who was it? Chris, you had your
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm looking at this as sort of a holistic approach to providing for voting for people with disabilities. And I think that, these three factors are very important, because I think with the presentation of these three, you'd be able to get a wide enough swath of people with disabilities while being able to accommodate those who require it. And the reason I'm saying that is because, as Lorelei had said, there's no way that we can predict who will use this and who won't, and there's no way we can predict how many people will be able to accept an accommodation versus who will be able to use a universally designed voting system. So I think it is very important for us to be able to look at providing all three of these things, as Lorelei had said before, because of the fact that if we're going to provide for an accessible environment, we have to be able to encounter multiple avenues to ensuring that level of accountability, while ensuring that we can provide accommodations to those requirements. So say hypothetically, if someone's internet goes down, they have a disability, maybe there's a way that they can get a lift to and from. I've heard that happen before. Just as an example of an accommodation that could potentially be used if all three of these things don't function as planned. But hearing the conversation about the internet being a good resource, voting from home would be a good option for those who want to choose it, as well as voting by mail would be a third echelon of that. Same holistic approach to providing that level of care for voting.
So, Chris, when you say these three, you're specifically saying the vote by mail, vote from home, and internet voting.
Yeah, can you scroll down, please? Can you show us the whole page?
Yeah, and then the other, how do vote by phone and remote accessible vote by mail fit into what you're saying?
So those sort of come across to me as being similar to, say, feedback mechanisms that are set up in provincial lines and federal lines. Any organization that has accessibility plan is required to provide for these types of feedback processes. So somebody doesn't have internet can use the mail. Somebody can walk in. Somebody can use a phone to relay their feedback to the organization. I hadn't seen these before, so these are other items that could well be used within this. And this isn't coming from a personal perspective, but it's coming from the federal and provincial perspective through the applied legislative feedback processes. So this has been tried and tested before, while ensuring that a certain level of accommodation can be met that's reasonable. But I think that the inclusion of all these resources for people would meet them where they're at, and that lowers the risk of liability to the city in terms of just applications to HROT, because you're then providing that level of accessibility. And so what I'm worried about us being caught in is this sort of level of pigeonholing us down to one selection, and then having to deal with that reverberation when that threshold of liability goes up, because we haven't provided this when we could. And again, that links to human rights factors that apply to all of us.
Just really quick, Kathy in the room has her hand up.
Kathy, go ahead.
Just as we're speaking, and I completely agree with the group, 100%. These are all pieces of accessibility, which are very important. I think it's important to recognize that there will have to be a process, because just to throw all this out willy-nilly will be very confusing and could cause chaos in terms of the entire process. So recognizing that it's also another piece of accessibility on how to offer this to the community and how to communicate between the community members what their preferences are, and giving them that space to understand and acknowledge what their options are, and who they can connect with to make the best decisions for themselves, and own this piece. So making a decision to offer everything as an accessibility piece and as many accessibility options as possible in itself is what creating accessibility is, but also that extra piece on how this is going to be connected to the community to be able to fill this out or make their preference, that also needs to be accessible and offered in accessible platforms as well.
So what I'm hearing is that, yes, offering as many as possible is important, but there's important considerations to be had in how those options are communicated out to people and how those are part of the integrated community conversation about voting.
Yeah, and also just the point of like the literal logistics of it all, like, does an individual understand that this is going to be presented to them by mail? Can they find it on the website to be emailed to them or mailed to them, or can they come speak to somebody? And then when they fill this out, they can decide upon their preferences, and then their preferred way of communication will be respected, and then a registration confirmation for when they can, vote, like little pieces of understanding, because there are individuals with like physical disabilities, but like cognitive and processing disabilities will need this to really understand the process of it, to actively participate in an equitable manner.
Yeah, so those literal logistics, do people understand how it works, what each step in the process is for each method, and what their options are?
Yeah, thank you.
Chris, you have your hand up.
Yeah, another consideration that came out of the last talker. I apologize, I'm really bad with names. But the factor of non-disclosure should be something that's also given priority on this. There's no way that anybody who's, say, marshaling this process should be allowed to ask if someone has certain symptomology or a certain type of disability. That's something that should remain out of scope, because that'll set up another echelon of complete sort of reactive processes that we've been through multiple times. In fact, everything that we do is kind of based on the idea, do we have to disclose or not? So it'd be really nice to have that baked into the voting system to say, if I'm going to go and use an online version, there's no requirement for me to state that I have a disability. If I'm going to use the same system through mail, then I shouldn't have to verify that I have a disability, because that is an antiquated process that ideally we'd like to see, you know, all of us come to a reasonable solution on. So it's very important that there be no slippage there, because if there is somebody down the line who asks for disclosure, then that is not allowed. And that might be seen as a reason to file an application or a reason to file a complaint with the city and so on. So just to be clear, if this is going to move forward, there can be no application of verification of identity.
Right. Right.
I hear a lot of people saying right. I also wanted to just strongly co-sign what Chris just said.
Absolutely.
Donna.
Yeah, following up on what Chris is saying, there would need to be some consideration about people that need to vote a certain way. For example, from home or by mail. Like, would someone have to ask? I could see the internet solution being universal. It's available, period. By mail, by would someone have to request a ballot? How would that work? How could that be as universal as possible? Those are other considerations going forward with this type of using all of these options.
Can I just interject for 1 minute? We have a procedural comment.
Yeah.
We're approaching 8:50. So, and the meeting is over in just under 13 or just at about 13 minutes. Are we going to continue past 8 o'clock? Like, is that something that somebody would want to put a motion on the floor? But I guess I'm asking the facilitator first, if that is even an option from the facilitator's perspective. And then if it is, then the committee should decide whether there's a motion related to that.
I'm here to serve the group and what the group wants and needs, so I'm happy to be flexible. I did see a couple head shakes no at the idea of extending, but there might be other voices to hear in that. In our last few minutes, what I would hope to do is just kind of recap what we've captured here for you, just at a high level. And then I do have one closing exercise that could help us to hear in a different way what each person is thinking about. Let me put it back to the group. What is it that you'd like for our last 10 minutes?
The chair is also going to need a couple of minutes to close the meeting as well, so just be aware of that.
Okay.
So procedurally, is somebody wanting to put forward a motion to extend the meeting? I think a few of us would not be able to, and then we wouldn't have quorum, so we might not. Okay, I don't see or hear a motion, so we're definitely a hard stop right at 8. We have to end, and I do need a couple minutes to close the meeting. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Lorelei. So I'm just going to take a step back to just kind of scroll through what I've captured in terms of notes. I won't read them all, but just to give us a picture and see if anyone has anything else they feel hasn't yet been captured. So we started off with acknowledgement that this type of a framework of folks being asked to share forces that attract and forces that repel was not a preferred way to have this conversation. In hearing everybody's different voices on the subject, there have been some thoughts that have come up around why something might not be an ideal method, but overwhelmingly I'm hearing folks say we need to provide as many options as possible. To ensure that we are not picking and choosing, whose needs are being met and whose are not. So most of my notes have stayed outside of that chart as comments on the whole picture. I think also just through what I've heard, internet voting, vote from home, and vote by mail seem to be kind of the most talked about, with vote by phone and remote accessible vote by mail being like, those are things that would be great as options for people who the other options aren't working for. That's kind of my high level assessment of what I've heard. Any other last comments or things you feel like we just haven't captured?
We have Kathy's hand up in the room as well.
Kathy, we'll start
Yeah.
with you.
Okay, so I just think put all of them on there as options. I think to prioritize what works best for the group, and then others can offer those options. Again, it's like a pick and choosing. When we think of barriers, all barriers can exist, and all of these options are really great options that could be an option to support somebody to vote. So I say yay to all of them as spaces of accessibility for voting.
Thanks, Kathy. I heard you say all barriers can exist, and all of these options could help to remove barriers as well. Lorelai, and sorry, I wasn't sure who was
So
first.
yeah, it was me, and then I think Chris is next. So for me, I have a few closing thoughts. I'll try to be very quick. One, something you said there about the first 3 voting options being the most talked about and the last 2 being kind of nice to have add-ons. I strongly disagree with that. That's what the group was saying. I think that that was maybe a miscommunication. I don't think that we were saying the first 3 are more important than the last 2, or are more, or were more talked about, or were more. So that's one thing. Secondly, I personally don't feel that this workshop, and this is, I mean this very, I'm autistic, and I sometimes lack the ability to structure my sentences in a way that is not offensive to people, and I feel like I might be stepping into that territory, and I want to say that I'm saying this with respect, and I'm not frustrated with anyone in this meeting, and I don't think anyone here has done a bad job of anything. But I personally don't feel that this workshop has been sufficient as a medium for us getting all of our thoughts. So I have a lot more to say about all the voting options. I know that we've had multiple discussions where we've gone a lot more in depth about each individual voting option with staff than we've had the chance to today. And I would welcome a direct conversation between just staff and the AAC that's not facilitated, because I feel like there's been some miscommunication in the notes being taken. Sometimes, like I noticed, all of the positives that I said about every single type of voting method didn't get listed, because of course they didn't. It's too fast. Like, I'm speaking too fast for you to keep up. I don't blame you for that. But I just don't feel like this workshop is where the conversation should end. I would really like to see staff come and have a dedicated, direct conversation with us, even just an hour long, of us just speaking our minds, of our thoughts about the different voting methods and giving you our feedback about the different voting methods, because I think a lot more people would have things to say. The last thing that I wanted to say is I know that next staff is going to be crafting a draft motion for us, and I would like to urge staff not to craft a draft motion that encourages us to pick a certain number of these, even though that may be the motion that staff is hoping to get from the AAC. I'd really like you to not guide us in what you would like us to tell you, and just instead say, like, what would you like to see for voting options? Because it can be a little bit coercive sometimes, unintentionally. I don't think the city is attempting to coerce anyone, but it can be very tricky for staff to come to a meeting where we're still learning how to write motions and to say, here's a draft motion, just fill in the blanks. And then we think our only option is to fill in those blanks. And then later that motion goes to council, and council says, well, the AAC said they were fine with just these 3, so that's fine. You know, we need to really have our voices heard in that motion. So
Thank you.
Thanks, Lorelai. I want you to know I've noted that my comment about the first 3 being most talked about and the last 2 not, that, and I appreciate you calling that out, because now that's directly added here, that is not what, that you disagree with that, and that sends the wrong message. that you've requested a dedicated and direct conversation that's not facilitated, where folks can continue to speak their minds and feedback, and that you'd urge staff not to craft a motion that recommends or guides by a few, and that option to fill in the blank is not sufficient.
We have 4 minutes left.
Right. We'll go to Chris for last comments, and then I'll pass to Lorelei to close.
Great. I just want to hone in on the fact that the standard now is nothing about us without us. And I think that this would follow through with this discussion on voting. In my professional realm, I'm doing a lot of consulting with school boards and libraries in other provinces, trying to get them set up for accessibility as well. And what we do as a best practice is that we give a list of possible accessibility features that they could use to correct a gap that represents a barrier to people with disabilities. So that is not necessarily coming from my professional background. It comes from other people's here. We're all professionals in our own right. But I just like to hone in on the fact that, you know, the term "nothing about us without us" is something that we actually take very seriously. And to follow up with what the committee had said around, you know, further consultation, further relaying of information to you that's from our lived experience and from our professional backgrounds is extremely key. Because of the fact that we're then applying the lens of accessibility, we're not applying the lens of accommodation in this role. So that's why I'm saying that these items which you've shown us all have to be sort of given together as a package holistically. I hope that made sense. I'm going to be quiet now.
Thanks, Chris. And I did say I'd pass to Lorelei to close, but I should just check if staff had anything else to also add before we close.
We're good.
Okay, I'll pass it back to you, Lorelei.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I want to thank you for coming and facilitating this today, and thank you to staff as well for making yourselves available, and thank you to all the members who've come here today. I'm not sure what I need to do in closing for a workshop, Leanne. Do we have to vote to adjourn the meeting, or how does this work?
Yeah, so just very quickly, there are a couple of staff announcements at the bottom of the agenda. Please note them. So the first one is that December 19th is the next meeting. And so, of course, this topic will be on that agenda, I believe. Yes. Yes. And then from 3 to 5 as usual. And so that's the 13th day. And when you receive emails from Sarah, shortly her last name will be changing. So just note that. So if you don't see it from Sarah Pennyworth, it's from Sarah Boganesian. All right, and that's it. So Lorelei, all you would do is, well, we're 2 minutes yet, so you'll need a motion to end the meeting because we're not ready.
Right. Will someone move to end the meeting and second?
Yes.
We've got Ted, who would like to second. We've got Elizabeth as a second. Thank you so much. All right. Is anyone opposed? Can anyone be opposed? No, they can't, can they? Anyway, it doesn't look like anyone is opposed. So thank you so much, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you all. Thank you for attending. Really appreciate it.